Scotland.
Thank you, and I call on Daniel Johnston.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Let me pick up just where the Cabinet Secretary left off, because if I'm not mistaken, if she's wanting practical solutions, let's look no further than £12 an hour for social care workers. A pledge not just adopted by Kate Forbes, but now a pledge from the current First Minister. So if our suggestions are so impractical, so wildly unaffordable, why are they being adopted by her own government? Frankly, the statement she just made lacks any form of credibility, and she knows fine well it's not a fixed budget, because this government controls income tax, it controls other levies, it has a variable budget. It can't change it within a year, yes, but it is not true to say that it is a fixed budget. But perhaps I need to make some progress, Mr Greer, I apologise. But perhaps the most interesting point of difference in this debate didn't come from the opposition benches. I think it came from Ivan McKee, because I agree with him. We do need a lean government, an agile government, a government using best technology. But that's not what we have. If you contrast what he was saying with the account that we had from Tom Arthur, that everything is fine, everything is best practice, I think it showed a level of complacency which actually stands at odds with what this government needs to do and what it needs to embrace. It stands at odds with even the most recent findings from Audit Scotland, where within their net zero report that they just published, where they said that there was ill-defined goals, ill-defined lines of accountability and overlapping responsibilities leading to poor outcomes. Now, I would suggest that if government listened a little bit more to people like Ivan McKee, they'd do a little less of the things that they currently are doing, as evidenced by that net zero paper. And it's perhaps why Ivan McKee was pushed out, because those challenging voices are not ones that this government can tolerate. Because that's what goes to heart what this debate is really about. Because a government that makes progress needs to be honest about mistakes. It needs to be honest about where it needs to make improvements, and needs to be honest about the challenges that it faces. But that's not what this government's interested in. And you only need to look as far as the recent cabinet reshuffle. Now, this government, in its infancy as it may be, is remarkable for very few things. It can't even claim the prize for self-inflicted crisis and disaster. No, that prize goes to Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss. No, the only thing it's remarkable for is its sheer size. A government that has doubled. A government that now almost 20% of parliamentarians sit on the government front benches, and most of us don't even qualify. Almost half the SNP group, and I would look to those members sitting across there. If you're not on the government benches, you might need to ask yourself why you've been overlooked. This is ridiculous. In the UK, the number of ministers is capped, and yet in the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, the SNP seem to ever grow those numbers. And it makes for bad government, because we know what it's about. It's about increasing the payroll vote, because it's part of a wider pattern. What this government is about increasing its level of control, increasing secrecy, control of the narrative, but that ultimately leads to bad decision-making and waste. Let me quote someone. We need to create a leaner, more efficient government that is focused on delivering results and cutting waste. Not my words, but from their First Minister. And I know they don't like quoting their previous First Ministers, but he was right, wasn't he? But it's not just ministers where this government is going wrong. On Quangos, again, do we remember the bonfire of the Quangos? But since that was uttered, the number of Quangos has increased. There's been a 29% increase in the number of executive board members, and 223 new positions created by the Scottish Government, taking the total number of those positions to 774. There are people now whose job description, whose description of what they do professionally on LinkedIn is a professional public board member. But when you have so many in such a small country, of course you need people to double up. But it is a sign of waste. It is a sign of confused objectives, and it is ultimately about outsourcing and abdicating responsibility, but it ultimately leads to bad outcomes for the public and the public purse. Now, Labour have also published, just last year, £3.7 billion worth of government waste under this budget. And that's not an exhaustive list. For example, it doesn't even include Angus Robertson's travel budget. But what it does, and the thread that runs through all of the issues that have been indicated, is a poor planning and poor objectives, whether it's the spiralling costs through a complete inability of this government to implement a workforce strategy, which resulting in delayed discharge spiralling out of control and hundreds of millions of pounds spent on agency spend, through to, and I couldn't have put it better than Willie Rennie did, the greatest hits of transport disasters and industrial interventions.
Please conclude, Mr Johnson.
He is absolutely right in his analysis, because it's driven by that same culture of secrecy, about putting politics over delivery, and it's why this government needs to go. We need a government that is focused on the key issues, housing, skills and industrial strategy, but ultimately delivery over spin, which is something this government is incapable of doing.